It's a pleasure to be here at TCF, an institution which I have been also taking some roles in previous activities. It's my pleasure. Now, let me begin with clarifying this topic first, the Imperial Processions. I'm using this term as the translation of a very common phrase that we come across in Ottoman sources, namely Alayı Hümayun. Of course, there are several other phrases, terms that the Ottomans used for imperial processions. These are the ones particularly designed for the Ottoman ruler as public appearances. And of course there are several categories that we can also find for which this term is used. For instance, when the Sultan moves, actually of course he moves always with a group of dignitaries with him, so he's never alone in that regard. So, but in the 17th century we come to see that this phrase Alayı Hümayun, which also sometimes referred as great processions, Alayı Azim, that I will show you an example, come to refer to something more special. Special in the sense that compared to the earlier centuries, particularly the 16th century, the Ottoman sultans regularly performed certain rituals, rites of power, especially when he was setting out for a campaign. Of course, that was also one of the most magnificent processions that you can witness, and thus also the contemporaries recorded these. I want to talk about today something that Professor Günhan mentioned. In the 17th century, we have very few visual sources about these processions. And I want to complement that gap in our knowledge with other sources, particularly narrative sources and archival sources, that could actually work with these visual sources. And in that regard, let me immediately start with this. Now, I will quote the description of this imperial procession by Mehmet IV. Sultan Mehmet IV, remembered as Mehmet the Hunter because of his passion for hunting, departed for Edirne in 1657 on a hunting expedition with a large entourage in a display of imperial majesty that has been preserved for history as a visual document in the form of a series of oil paintings commissioned by Claes Renam, then the Swedish ambassador to Istanbul. This almost cinematographic record, consisting of a total of 20 paintings, is preserved at the Nordiska Museet, the Nordic Museum in Sweden, in Stockholm. A selection of 16 of the paintings that are in good condition for exhibition now return to Istanbul nearly 350 years after this event as the guest of the Para Museum. Now this was what the Para Museum announced as its official opening of the exhibition back in 2006. So 6 years ago, Istanbulites, we had the chance to see these paintings by our eyes, and only 16 of them were over here, and they were indeed a very rare, or as this quotation I mentioned, almost a cinematographic record on a 17th century sultan depicting him in one of his most conspicuous public appearances. Surprisingly enough, we don't have any equivalent group of sources, visual sources, or a series of other types of paintings for other Ottoman sultans, even for Mehmet IV, who is known to travel between Istanbul and Edirne on various occasions, at least 5 occasions, and all of them were with such great processions. I was very much personally fascinated by the details of these oil paintings when I went to attend a symposium at the museum, which was organized as part of this exhibition. And we were there with Professor Atasay, and we discussed, the significance as well as the rarity of this collection, which was, as I mentioned, commissioned by the Swedish ambassador Renan. Renan also provides us his observations in the capital, and there is a yet to be published a translation of his diary. And in that diary, Renan explains why Mehmet IV, who was at the age of 17 at this date, why he did this procession to Edirne. He was informed by one of our famous, actually, Ottoman figures, Albertus Bobowski, Ali Ufkubek, in other words, the Polish renegade, who had been working at the time at the Topkapi Palace, saying Renan about the very reason he figured it out behind Mehmet IV's travel to Edirne. I quote, "The real reason for the Turkish emperors traveling to Adrianople, Edirne, was that he had now become 17 years of age, when all Turkish emperors are obliged to make their first journey to Adrianople, which was their first residence in Europe. Then they ascend to their own direction of their regiment. Until then, they are under the supervision of their mothers." This is a translation I took from Karen Adels's translation of the original diary and published by the Swedish Institute here. The collection of articles of these Renan paintings. Now, there's an interesting detail here. First of all, 17 years of age, of course, is the age when any ruler in the world, generally speaking, was regarded as now at the age of puberty or past the puberty, and hence could be regarded as an independent ruler. But for the Ottomans, not until the 17th century we see any sort of this kind of discussion that a sultan is now regarded, at the age to rule. Well, there's a good reason for this. Because until the beginnings of the 17th century, for generations of sultans, there was no problem whatsoever in terms of the succession of the sultans on the throne. Every single sultan, before they assumed the throne, was at an age, in certain cases also over, for example, 30 or 40 years, because of the system, because of the dynastic system the Ottomans had. Namely, the Sancak system, the provincial system, that any prince, the Şehzade, when they reached the age of puberty, they were circumcised, and following that circumcision, they were sent to a province as a governor, and hence there they adopted a miniature form of the majestic imperial rule of their fathers, and then they completed their education in all means, formed their own household, started to reproduce, hence they also had their sons, and then, though there is no rule that regulated the succession in Ottoman dynastic understanding, that these sons of the ruling sultan at one point either had to fight for the throne, or if there's only one, automatically came and succeeded. Now, in all these instances, before Ahmet I, who was the ruler between 1603 and 1617, the succession was from father to son. There was no break in this lineage. Ahmet, in that regard, is so crucial. And what I will today try to tell you is that starting from his reign onwards, that all these imperial processions took a new kind of meaning, or the intended message about the majesty, the imperial majesty of the Ottoman Sultans, have switched to another level with particular emphasis on the youthness of the Ottoman Sultan, yet that he is still capable of ruling this great empire. Over here, let me briefly go over first what these imperial processions were like, and also the rarity of the Relam collection and the details of these processions. Because what I want to combine today is, though we don't have such visual sources, let's say for Ahmet I or his sons, actually there are three of them that succeeded, one after each, namely Osman II, Murat IV, and Ibrahim, the father of Mehmet IV. And in between Ahmet and Osman II, there is his brother, Mustafa I succeeded, which is the most unusual event in the 17th century that broke this father-to-son succession pattern. So I want to combine this lack of visuality of the imperial processions with this very special context, what I will refer as a general 17th century crisis in Ottoman history, particularly political and dynastic. And I will try to combine the narrative sources and some archival sources that are no less actually powerful in their depiction of these processions. So, in other words, I want to portray you another version of these imperial processions, but not with visual actually help, but more with the words that come from eyewitnesses. Here you see there are 20, but here I just picked a few scenes. You see, of course, these imperial processions, let me clarify that first, started from morning and lasted all the way until afternoon. Groups of the courtiers, the kapukulu, the household, the members of the household of the Sultan, actually paraded, starting from the Topkapı Palace. And if the destination, like this one, is Edirne, of course they went to the Edirne Kapı, the gate of Andrianopol, and from there they typically ended up first at Davut Pasha. Davut Pasha was an important halting station, both for the Ottoman army, imperial army in their western campaigns, or for any Ottoman Sultan who wanted to go to Edirne or wanted to go for hunting. So, and there is, in the 16th century, a beautiful hunting lodge, I can maybe refer as such, founded there. So typically the first stage of this imperial procession was from Topkapı Palace through the Edirne Gate and ended up at Davut Pasha. And also reverse. Sometimes when they came from Edirne to Istanbul, they waited at Davut Pasha and prepared for an imperial procession that will impress all the viewers. And that's another point that I want to touch today, that there is this particular intention of these imperial processions impressing the audience. And within that audience, particularly the ambassadors, European and Iranian ambassadors. So what we are seeing here is what I just briefly tried to describe, a series of soldiers, courtiers, bureaucrats, all attached to the Sultan's household. And of course, in the 17th century, the Sultan's household comprised of thousands of people as such. Here you see the Janissary officers, followed by more. And also, since this is going to be a hunting expedition, what turned out to be a hunting expedition for Mehmet IV, you can see these leopard skins over the shoulders of the Janissaries, and these are what it seems to be from that hunting corps of the palace. You see the Cebaşıbaşı, the chief armorer, and the Acemi Oğlans. Here you see in the front the Janissary Aga, who is the chief, the head of the Janissaries, and also the surgeons or the court messengers and other officials. the, of course, mounted soldiers, the sipahis. And let me also note the elaborate, of course, clothes they are all, carrying. So it's truly, we can imagine, quite impressive. I can actually visualize in my mind with all these different colors and forms of fabrics. And of course, every procession included members of the hierarchy of the Ottoman state, we can call at this time, starting from the viziers all the way to the members of the clergy, the ulema. And here probably we are looking at, though the description is missing, what I think, maybe Günhan Hocam can correct me over here, seems to be kapucus, the kapucu-başıs. Probably. And then, as members of the ulema, we see different also sheikhs or Sufi sheikhs following. So, in other words, all these processions gathered every single segment of the Ottoman, actually, political body, and then displayed them in a procession that first and foremost emphasized this magnanimity of the Ottoman Sultan, that he is ruling this great realm, this great society and political establishment. Of course, the viziers, as the ministers of the Ottoman Sultan, followed at the back of this procession before the Sultan, with their own households, that I will give you more details about that we are going to talk about thousands and thousands of such members of vizierial households. And finally, of course, after this show of the power of the Sultan, we see him coming on a beautiful horse, followed, of course, in a very well designed choreography. Here you see the solaks. These are the bodyguards of the Ottoman Sultan with their special headgear and feathers. And of course, Mehmet IV here is still young, without any facial hair, and of course, the kind of shadows of him, the rikabdar, the silahtar, the strip holder, and his sword bearer. Now, when we look at 16th century, in order to contextualize these 17th century processions, we need to look at the 16th century and go back to the, of course, one ruler that truly changed, that truly reconfigured, that truly remodeled all these processions, namely Süleyman I, or as the Europeans remember him, Süleyman the Magnificent. Ottomans, of course, preferred Kanuni, the law abider or lawgiver. Now, in the 46-year-long reign of Süleyman, the court of the Ottoman Sultan, its rituals, symbolic meanings, ideological emphases are all switched to a different level as the empire territorially kept going, expanding. We see that the aura of the Ottoman Sultan was now truly remodeled on certain practical also areas. Imperial processions of Süleyman the Magnificent are probably the reason why he's now, or by then, known as Magnificent. These were truly impressive processions. All these 17th century processions, we know from narrative sources and visual sources such as Ralam's collection, are actually a continuity of what Süleyman established back in the 1530s and 1540s. I want to show Mehmet IV here closely because I'm going to compare him to his grandfather, Ahmet I, shortly. This is what I was just referring, the procession of Sultan Süleyman through the hippodrome. This is a painting, I think roughly from 52, 53, painted by a Flemish artist. And of course, this is an engraving, and you can see, though it's not yet, you know, a good visual to understand the regularity and this well precise or choreographical order of the procession. This is the Friday, actually, procession of the Sultan. Now, this is also something he initiated, actually, not initiated, but fixed as part of the Ottoman Sultan's public appearances. From this period onwards, 1540s, we see the Ottoman Sultan attends the Friday prayers with his entourage, going to a nearby Imperial mosque. If there is one by his own, such as Süleymaniye or Hagia Sophia, the prime, of course, Imperial mosque for a long time, the Sultan slowly processed from his palace to that mosque. And we know from sources that these processions lasted for hours. So the intention is quite simple. You go to a mosque, pray, and then come back. But the idea is now to show that the Sultan is first in good health, in charge, and also this is one of the rare moments for his public to see him and also to reach him sometimes through petitions, writings, and they all line up on the streets and then try to hand him over petitions in, you know, in every problem we can imagine. But why Süleyman did this kind of processions, how he redefined these processions, because we also see that the Ottoman Sultan, starting from Fatih Mehmet II, that is now becoming much less visible, much less accessible, and also he himself, as a supreme ruling or paramount ruling figure at the top of the whole system, is now delegating his authority to his Grand Vizier, which will become de facto ruler of the empire. And the Sultan, of course, like other rulers of the world, like Charles V, Francois I, are now preferring to stay actually aloof from the burdens of the rule. And hence, we can make a distinction between to rule and to reign. So from now on, we see Ottoman Sultans not directly ruling, if you can categorize that, but they are reigning. So Süleyman, in every way, redefined, refashioned the Ottoman Sultanate, or the way the Ottoman Sultans ruled. And as part of that redefinition, he established these processions as part of Ottoman imperial majesty. His successors continued the tradition. Now, this is Mehmet III, the father of Ahmet I, the son of Murat III, and Mehmet III is known in Ottoman history as, first of all, let me point that, as the first sultan who, after a hiatus of 30 years, decided to go on campaign in person, like Süleyman the Magnificent, who is known to have campaigned 13 times. It was in the year 1596 that he was convinced to lead the army all the way to the Habsburg frontier. At one point during the campaign, they decided to move against the fortress of Eger to settle down those border disturbances. And for 186 days, the Sultan was on campaign. And how do I know this? Because I recently discovered the diary of a campaign that I'm going to publish. With all the hardships you can imagine. In the end, the campaign was successful, resulted in the capture of Eger Fortress, which is a crucial strategic castle on the Habsburg-Ottoman frontier. And then on the way back, after this 186 days, the Sultan came to Davut Pasha, and from Davut Pasha they waited a few days so that a victory procession can be organized. And this is a picture painted by Nakkash Hasan, or I think we know as such,
Yes.
correctly. And you can see that this is more or less a similar version of Mehmet's hunting expedition. The people of Istanbul gathered on the streets, and then group by group, the Ottoman army this time. And when we say Ottoman army, of course, we are talking about 80,000, 100,000 in total, but probably those soldiers that came and entered Istanbul were much less in number. But from other sources, I can figure out there were at least like 10 to 15,000 soldiers or attendees and courtiers. So these are truly grandeur, magnificent entries. Over here, you can see Mehmet III. Again, unlike Ahmed or unlike Mehmet III, he's a grown-up man. Though he's going to be the first sultan to die at the youngest age that we can figure out in Ottoman history. He was at the age of 37 when he died of a heart attack in the year 1603. And at his death, he had only 2 sons left. One was Ahmed, and he became Ahmed I. The other one was Mustafa, Şehzade Mustafa. Now, I don't want to go into the whole details. I wrote an article about this, that there was an older Şehzade of Mehmet by the name Mahmud, Şehzade Mahmud, who was executed by his own father a few months before the death of the Sultan. So, in other words, he had, by the year 1603, three Shehzades that could guarantee the continuity of this father-to-son succession, but because Shehzade Mahmud was suspected of plotting for the throne, he ended up executed. Now, after Mahmud's execution, it was Ahmed's turn, because he was the oldest at the time. Now, in the traditional Ottoman historiography, the age of Ahmed's brother, Mustafa, is typically referred as like 2 years or 3 years younger than the brother. That is to say, Ahmed was born around 1590, and Mustafa is believed to have been born around 1592-93. So, before this campaign, in other words, Mehmet III had really infant babies also in the household. What happened later, and this was quite an accident, what we call a dynastic accident, because he died at such a young age, is that I figured it out that Mustafa could not be that older when compared to his brother Ahmed's age, and I figured out from Italian sources that he was probably only 3 years old by the year 1603, and Ahmed was only 12 or 13 years old. So this is the time we see the whole dynasty will face a serious threat of extinction, and hence these imperial processions will start to gain a new message. And this is one of my arguments. So when Ahmed succeeded, he had no sons, he had not been to any province, so he had no political experience. He had only one brother left, who is a baby. So here is what happened, that if he, by chance, could not produce any sons or any child in that regard, the dynasty would have to wait Mustafa to grow up in this time when the infant deaths were kind of the norm of the day. We had plague, smallpox, all sorts of epidemics or diseases that we know by historical sources were affecting also the top Caucasus because it's a crowded, small area. So they had to wait, in that case, for a long time so that the young Shehzade could grow up, and again, by chance, hopefully, inshallah, he could, bear a son for the throne. So this is a moment, truly, a crisis moment in Ottoman history. Well, luckily, Ahmed proved himself, proved his prosperity, and in a year he had 2 sons, Mehmet and Osman. Osman and Mehmet by order, and Osman will become Osman II later. And of course, still this didn't solve this problem that there's no guarantee yet that the dynasty could go on through the male's blood. So this is one of the reasons why he had to keep his growing brother, who is now the second oldest male in the dynasty, for a long time, because I'm sure you all know that there is the kind of tradition of fratricide in Ottoman history, that the brother who gains the throne could execute his brothers, and without any exception in that regard, since Mehmet II's law code, they exercised this right. But Ahmet couldn't do it. He was stopped to do that. Now, over this political framework, let me go on and share with you these interesting sources. Now, here is Murat III. And this is a miniature that we find in the prime collection of Ganizade Nadiri. And it is dated around the beginnings of the 17th century, I think roughly 1605. So it is from the reign of Ahmet I, that I will show you that he is also included in this poem collection. These poems actually are all about the sultans and their important courtiers. Murat III here is depicted following the Süleymanic example on his procession to a mosque. And again, here you see the people cheering. And here what I mentioned, the petitions they are trying to reach to the Sultan. And here the Janissaries are heralded, the Kapucus and other viziers, the shadows, as I said, the Rikaptar, Silahtar, and Ibriktar, they're all following him. This is probably, yes, Hagia Sophia, so this is the Imperial gate of the palace, so he runs from that. So Süleyman, his successors, kept going on this tradition of public appearances. Now, Ahmet also knew this tradition very well. Though he was a very young sultan, he was quite ambitious to become a second Süleyman. This is what we learn from the contemporaries. Immediately after he succeeds to the throne, he proclaims, after he visits the shrine of Eyüp and girded with a sword, he comes back from Eyüp, the Golden Horn area, through the gate of Adrianople, Edirne Kapı, and then make this procession all the way to the palace, like he's going on a campaign with all his ministers around him, and then he orders that it be proclaimed that I'm going to go on campaign soon. Well, this was a sultan only 13 years old. There was no way they would let him go. And remember the quotation I gave you. Albertus Bovero saying that until they reach the age of 17, they are under the supervision of their mothers. But this is actually the time that this problem starts. Because we know, and I wrote this extensively in my dissertation, that because Ahmet was so young, he needed a regent. But there's no tradition of regency in Ottoman history, so his mother, Handan Sultan, became the de facto regent, together with his tutor, Mustafa Efendi. And this will actually be a de facto application for all these younger or underage sultans, because all the sultans, all the way to Mehmet IV, except Ibrahim, were all, at this kind of puberty or post-puberty age. Ahmet was 13. Mustafa was, as I said, probably 16, 17. Osman was 12, we can say. Murat IV, his brother, was again 13. Ibrahim, of course, as the youngest sultan, was around 23. And then Mehmet was only 7 at the time of their enthronement. So that's why Bobovus was correct. Now, Ahmet, as I try to explain, broke this or tried to immediately, start ruling in person. Here we see him going to Edirne. Here is Selimiye. But this is something, quite an unusual procession he did. Actually, there was no procession at all in his travel to Edirne. We know that when he was hunting, and by the way, this is another hunter sultan in that regard, when he was hunting around the Davut Pasha Sahrası, the plains of Davut Pasha, he decided to go to Edirne without notifying his mother nor anybody. So he wanted to show that he could do this. He could actually act on his own. So that's why, as he approached the city, the second capital, people, of course, welcomed him. And among these people was Ganizade Nadiri, who was a judge of Edirne at the time. So that's why he had more intimate knowledge of his entry, Sultan's entry. But overall, still, the posture of the Sultan, everything is still coming from that Süleyman. And he, as I said, he wanted to become a second Süleyman, and for that reason, once he secured that the dynasty could continue through his own line, and also if you consider that this was a period in Ottoman history that the Ottomans were at war on 3 different fronts, with the Habsburgs in the west, with the Safavids in the east, and then the whole Anatolia was in turmoil because of the Celali rebellions. Now, Ahmed, with his able ministers, will actually come over all these military and political problems. By 1606, there will be a treaty signed with the Habsburgs, ending what we call the Long War that lasted 13 years. And then a few years before this, the wars with the Safavids will again actually fueled, but the tensions on the eastern frontier will be minimized. And then by 1609, the Celali rebellions will be suppressed by the Grand Vizier Kuyucu Murat Pasha. So, after Ahmed managed, or his ministers managed to kind of clear the ground with these problems, Ahmed took the opportunity immediately to display himself this time. Now he could claim that the Ottomans are back in power. Ottomans are now relieved of their, old problems, dynastic problems, political problems, military problems. So this is a crisis moment, and in that crisis context that Ahmed now tries to give that message that everything can be back on order. Now, here is a passage from a contemporary chronicler, Topçular Katibi Abdülkadir Efendi, published in 2003 by Ziya Yılmazer. This is, as his name says, that Topçular Katibi was a senior member of the Ottoman Artillery Corps, and his 2-volume chronicle is one of the rare insights into these processions, because he was, if he was not on campaign, he was always as part of those processions. Now, I'm not going to give you this whole passage, but I want you to catch up certain phrases and numbers, because this can give us further information. Now, first of all, you see here all the viziers are mentioned. Vezir-i Azam, Nasuh Pasha. By the way, this is 1612. The first time Ahmed decided to show himself in the most conspicuous manner to his public, as well as to those ambassadors who were in Istanbul to conclude or re-sign those treaties, the Habsburgs as well as the Safavid ambassadors. So first the viziers, here Nasuh Pasha, and then we have the second vizier, Kapitan Mehmet Pasha, and then we have the third vizier, Yüce Mehmet Pasha, fourth vizier, Davut Pasha, fifth vizier, Mehmet Pasha. Sam Pasha, the painter, actually, that same painter from Ganizade Mehmet's poem collection. And then the sixth and the seventh, I cannot find this on these. somewhere here. And then they are all referred by their ketudas, by their kind of secretaries. And then, if you look, they give certain numbers, 500 neferat. And then they are all depicted, in their military costumes, very much adorned, and with bayraks, the different kinds of flags and other distinguishing actually colors. And then, of course, they are all in lines, saf, sağ kolda, on the right, on the left. And then, Edirne Kapusu, we see this again and again referred, that this is a procession that comes into the city, the capital, the city within the walls, always do that. And then they are all saluting the Sultan. So when the procession continues, of course, at one point, they cannot go on further when they reach the top of the place. So what they do is that as they march, either on foot or on horse, they come at a point, designated point, and then line up on two streets. So we can imagine how magnificent this procession is. There are thousands of people saluting the Sultan, and the Sultan just truly, rides the horse, very much self-confident all the way. So this is kind of the verbal description, but this is still limited. This is still limited. We don't have, larger understanding of, how many truly, people contributed. But overall, yes, we know the people of the city gathered, and then, over here you can see they were lined up, and everybody was, in well order. But we have other sources. And these sources actually coming from the contemporary observers of the Ottoman court, Ottoman palace, the processions. Some are connected to the ambassadors or embassies here in the city. Some are just like travelers, merchants, or informants working for these ambassadors. Now, here are two families. Especially the family over here on the left side is the one I just actually took from the Topçular Kağıdı'n's account, that this is, as the title gives, is about Sultan Ahmet's entry to the city to impress the ambassador of Persia, Safavids. And here is the date, it is October 16. The other one over here is from the same year, but this one, which I will later hopefully include into my analysis of these processions, is about the marriages or the engagement of Ahmet's very minor daughters to the high-ranking viziers. And each of these engagements were also taken by the young sultan and his, family or advisors to again emphasize that there is Ottoman, power, and the sultan is in charge. So in each of these engagements, they also make very beautiful, very nicely designed processions. For instance, Ayşe Sultan, Ahmet's eldest daughter, was married to Nasuh Pasha, the Grand Vizier of the period, and they were given Ibrahim Pasha's palace of the Sultan Ahmet. And we have from this account the whole dowry actually were put on procession. Just to give you one detail about that is that the Sultan gifted his daughter gelin başlığı hocam. How do you translate?
Bride's headgear.
Headgear, bride's headgear, worth 800,000 akçes. All with.
May I have this?
Of course, please.
For my Ibrahim Pasha book.
Of course, of course. So it was worth. And then there is the other daughter. I'm sorry, let me correct. It was Gevherhan Sultan, not Ayşe Sultan, Gevherhan Sultan. And Gevherhan Sultan was married to Mehmet Pasha, the second vizier. Ayşe Sultan was married to Nasuh Pasha. And it was a solid gold headgear, and all the headgear was adorned with rubies, emeralds, and diamonds. Each of these pieces, according to the source, worth 800,000 francs. So quite a treasure. And then, just of course, camel loads of other document. Now, here is the kind of the geographical setting, because, of course, I don't want to bore you with the whole, kind of the methodological and other historiographical problems I'm tackling. That I briefly mentioned that these were the rights of power. They reinvent certain traditions, coming from the Sulaimani period. They want to emphasize the continuity of the dynasty because of the travels of the time. But overall, as we look, all these imperial processions got truly bigger. So in other words, there's this reverse correlation. When the empire is on its confident stage, yes, they do big processions. But when they are much less powerful, or had been experiencing serious financial problems, they still invest more to keep that image. I mean, isn't this still the same problem? Image is everything. And Dolmabahce Palace, for example, that comes to mind in an age when the Ottomans were struggling. They did not spare anything but everything to make that big palace. So here is the first hill, the peninsula, the palace over here. So typically, of course, they follow the Byzantine processional routes, and after they come, and of course, if you close the city by the city wall over here, and I think Edirne Kapı should be here, right? Yes, Ayvansaray should be right here. So they went all the way to Davut Pasha. Davut Pasha, for Ahmet and for the succeeding sultans, became a station where all these imperial processions took their final forms. Now, I want to briefly go over in more details of how these processions work from Ahmet I all the way to Mehmet IV. Now here is, you can see, this time Davut Pasha, but he's the captain of the time. And all these numbers, of course this is in French, all these numbers that you see are the numbers of the attendants from different chambers of the vizierial household. Since the Grand Vizier had the largest number of people in his household, again replicating the Sultan's own household, you can see that the numbers are truly fascinating. For example, right here, you see almost 1,000 baltages, more than 500 çavuşus, 200 captains of the Ağız of Janissaries. So these are the bölük agas. 400 azabs, for example. So altogether, from the contemporary sources of this particular procession in 1612, we see, I estimate, and this is only one page, by the way, it is 21 pages, we see roughly 15 to 20,000 men and women, because there are some also women, particularly the female members of the Sultan's household, also attended in carriages. But they are, yes, in carriages, but they are also coming after these soldiers went. Now, Ahmet, especially right around this time, if you remember that he also started his most expensive and most ambitious project. again, following the footsteps of his great-grandfather, Süleyman, that he wanted a mosque by his own name. And hence, today, what we see, Blue Mosque, or popularly known as Blue Mosque, this Ahmediye, was also under the construction because it started in 1609. So, 1609, 1612, and then we have 1613, and then 1614 processions. These are all actually a new project by Ahmet I, as I call it, that he wanted to show that everything is back, and then Ottomans could now reclaim, its superiority, or once more prominent position again. So these imperial processions, in that regard, helped him to convey this message, to convey this image. I think I have 5 more minutes. I cannot stop because there are a lot of other details. Now, here is something English we can follow maybe all together. Now, this is Thomas Corrietes's account on Ahmet's entry this time to the city. And as I said, from Davut Pasha. Either they go on Davut Pasha and then follow to Edirne, or they come from Edirne, or if they are on the European provinces, stop in Edirne and then enter to the city. And these entrances particularly were the most, I would say, glorious examples. Now, even the contemporaries figured it out that this was intended to show the pomp of the Sultan, and hence we see this titles like the Alay-i Azim of Topçular Katibi, the great procession. We also see these pomp by the Grand Signior, the Ottoman Sultan. Again, here we see the number, 15,000. It says, the palace where hence he came that morning, Ahmet, is called Davut Pasha. A place standing by itself in the country, some 3 miles from Constantinople, so that's roughly 5 kilometers. The people that attended upon his person at the time were said to amount to the number of 15,000. Now, again, all these eyewitnesses or observers, like Ranam did in his diary and in the paintings we see, start one by one what they see, what they saw. First wrote the Subaşı, so he's the sergeant of the city, like the Emniyet Amiri of the period, and then Galata with 100 men, horseback, and then it goes. And then, of course, there are some non-Ottoman, let me put that way, non-Ottoman elements. And here, something we see in the 17th century, French soldiers, French mercenaries that effectively defected to the Ottomans during this long war with the Habsburgs in the early 1600s. And why they are in the procession? Well, maybe we can simply say that the Ottoman Sultan wanted to show that he's such a great Sultan that even the French soldiers, even the Christian soldiers are now acknowledging him or recognizing him as a supreme ruler. So they are in that. And then it goes on. Again, I don't want to bore you, but overall, after this French mercenaries section, then became a great multitude of Ajemi Oğlans. These are the novices in the Janissary court, and these are all on foot. And then a coach with the cloth of gold, which served for the Grand Signior riding, where himself and the Sultana. Haha, here is the woman. Of course, guess who is this lady? The Sultana is Kösem. Kösem Sultan, and she is the one that would create that regency of the mothers for all these underage sultans, and she will stay in power for close to 40 years. And it was only the mother of Mehmet IV, Hatice Turhan Sultan, that will banish him, actually, will make her killed only in 1651. So she also knew, this imperial ways of power. So again, she was there. The Deli, for example, remember those Janissaries with the leopard skins? These also delis were, wearing, very, even sometimes naked they were, but these are like the most bravest soldiers attended the armies. So it says here full, but they have this bare skin. Çavuşus again, and then here again numbers. We have 200, 4,000, and these are the Janissaries on foot. 4,000 with their muskets. So this is again a combination of both like a military as well as a civilian, procession. Of course, all sorts of interesting items you can see that they attached or carried in their hands or in their bodies. A black elephant, even there are even certain animals. Of course, if the Sultan was on hunting or was going on a hunting expedition, one of the important groups attending these processions were the hunting chambers from the palace, like the Samsoncus, the dogs, hunting dogs, the Shahincis, the hawkers. So, and these animals were also dressed. So they were also, carrying, like the hawks were all, carrying golden bracelets and etc. So it was truly magnificent. It goes on. I mean, when you read these eyewitnesses, it just simply goes on. Of course, the horse of the Sultan was always an object of, interest and awing. And here, of course, every single time when you read such accounts for imperial processions of the 17th century sultans, they all say, I have never seen such a great pomp. So this is said for Ahmed, this is said for Murat IV, this is said for, like Ralam, for Mehmet IV. So that's why it just keeps going bigger and more magnificent. So, I think I may finish here by saying that Ahmed did 2 hunting expeditions. Murat did 1 hunting expedition to Edirne. Osman did actually campaign himself in 1621 all the way to Hotin, which was the northern foremost point a sultan went. And in all these instances, they made such processions as they entered. So, without maybe examples such as Ralam's great paintings, or the paintings he commissioned, we still have quite rich sources, bywords, that we can understand that in the 17th century, despite it was a crisis century, because depositions, regicides, all undermined the standing of the Ottoman dynasty, still the Ottomans fought hard to keep their glorious heritage, and of course Süleyman's image that a sultan that truly shattered the grounds in all continents. So I hope this was a presentation that raised some more questions rather than answers. I thank you for your attention and look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.